Hello fellow guitarists and welcome to the first video of my new video cycle Ultimate Guitar Buying Guide or UGBG. This series of video is oriented on every kind of a guitar player who either picking out the first guitar or even if you're experienced and look for something to spice up your collection. The main idea of this series of video is to make a full-on guide on a specific topic. Today it will be the pickups. So let's start with the pickups themselves, and I need to say that pickup is, well, a bit of a difficult topic, and because of this, it will be sometimes a bit hard to follow, so feel free to use chapters and scroll back and reroll and do everything like this. So without further ado, let's start with the boring stuff. How does pickup work? Well, to be honest, rather simple. So the overall idea how pickup work is rather simple. We have magnets and copper wire that is wrapped around the bobbin. And because of rather unique capabilities of copper, while the magnetic field is disturbed, it can create a little electric currents inside the copper wire. This is how pickup basically works. So we have a movement of a string, and afterwards we have a magnetic field disturbed and the copper wire having this tiniest bit of electric current. Because string vibrates at a certain frequency, only it is picked up by the pickup, and we have this electric current transferred to the copper and through the output wire of the pickup transferred to the guitar electronics and then to the amp, and we have the amplified sound. It's a bit more complicated than that, but come on, who needs this? We are about types of pickups. And so let's dive straight into this. And now let's go to types of pickups. Basically, we can create an axis on which any pickup will find its place. It can be either a single coil or a humbucker, and it can be either active or passive pickups. Once again, there is a bit more complications about these things, but you will hear about them very much in the end of the video, so stick around to it. And the last thing that we will need to discuss before we jump into direct examples is basically three things that we will mention while discussing the tone of each pickup, which is frequency response, which is pretty much self-explanatory, how much the pickup has high frequencies, low frequencies, mid frequencies, the output, or how hot the pickup is, which is basically how easy it is to overdrive the pickup, and the clarity, which is basically how easy it is to distinguish every note in the chord that is played on this exact pickup. We will leave those boring parts about stuff like types of magnets and types of back plates and everything like this to the end of the video, because it's not that much about the pickup types itself rather than tuning of specific pickups. So now let's jump straight into the first pickup. So let's start this talk about pickup types with the single coil, and let's start with the probably one of the most famous, one of the most broadly used and easy to get access to, the Fender Stratocaster single coil. It's famous for its very bright, very dynamic sound with lots of high end and low inductance, which kind of makes it very useful for low gain applications. And why only for low gain one? Well, because it has one flaw, and this flaw is hum. It's the sound of the electric current that will always be present in the sound, no matter how much you will try to remove it. And the problem with this is that when you increase the gain, this hum becomes more pronounced and more ear-scratching. And because of this, although Stratocasters are used in rock music, you won't find them in heavier genres of rock and metal. Very similar to the Strat pickup is the Telecaster single coil. You can see that the neck one looks similar, but they're both just a bit different. Although it's basically the same design, the bridge one has a bigger base plate that is made of steel, which changes the magnetic field from the hourglass shape on the Strat single coil to more of a triangle shaped one, which results in a more twangy sound. The neck pickup has the cover, which removes a bit of a low end. But to be honest, there is not that much of a crucial differences in both of pickups, and you can get a similar sound out of both of them. Variation on the Strat single coil is Jaguar pickup. The only difference here is that it has a steel protrusions on the sides of the pickup that looks like teeth. You know, Jaguar has teeth. Because steel is magnetic, it interacts with the magnets and once again increases the magnetic field. Basically, those teeth act like a separate pair of pole pieces, which does two things. First of all, it increases inductance, making the Jaguar pickups a bit more hotter compared to the similar Strat one. And the second thing is that it enriches the low end. But to be honest, once again, there is not that much of a significant margin, so if you want the pickup with more low end, you don't need to ditch your Strat for a Jaguar. The next pickup we will be talking about has a far more unique design, and it's a lipstick single coil. It was created by Danelectro to, first of all, save cost. So instead of 6 different pole magnets, it has one, and the copper is wrapped almost around it, and it also wrapped in cellophane, dipped in wax, and put in a tube from lipstick because it was cheaper to do it that way. There is a legend that the Danelectro factory was near the Max Factor one, and they simply had a good deal about the non-used lipstick covers. Right now they do their own casing for the pickups, but the name stuck. Overall construction resulted in a lower output pickup because of all of the extra covering and casing, and less low end on the pickup, which resulted in a rather thin, janglier, crispier, and chimey sound. It's a rather unique pickup for the people who are into specific genres requiring this sound. One of the most famous example is the surf rock. Next pickup we will be speaking about is the Gibson P90. First of all, it looks huge, but yes, it's a single coil, a true single coil. Although it has far more copper wire inside, the wind space, the bobbin itself, is a bit shorter, which results in more of winds on top of each other. This results in a warmer, richer, and darker sound, but of course you're sacrificing some of the brightness for it. The other defining feature of the P90 is adjustable pole pieces, because they are non-magnetic. It's basically screws that are screwed into the bar that is in contact with the magnet. It's a very cool idea, but it derived from the first P90s being non-adjustable in terms of the height. Some people call the P90 the middle ground between humbucker and the single coil, which is not true. It's a true single coil. It doesn't have any humbucking capabilities. Yes, compared to original single coil, it's darker, it has warmer sound, and it's a rather hot sounding pickup. Yeah, it's a hot single. Go ahead, make your jokes. But its warmer tone paved its way into the jazz. If you have a P90, roll tone to 5, put it in the neck position, and you're already getting a very decent jazzy sound. And also their high output makes it rather easy to distort. So overall, although they're once again not that useful for very heavy genres, they are rather versatile. Very similar to P90 in terms of looks, but nothing similar in terms of sound, is a Jazzmaster Pickups. Yeah, the guitar is called Jazzmaster, but those pickups ended up being absolutely not for jazz. Biggest difference between P90 and the Jazzmaster pickup is that Jazzmaster one has a far shallower or shorter bobbin. And there is no magnet underneath, so the pole pieces are once again the magnets, in a classical Fender way. The idea behind the Jazzmaster pickups was that it's a Strat pickup in its core, but with a winded up and shallower bobbin to improve low end response for jazz musician, which results in the end in a more classic single coil sound. That's why Jazzmaster ended up being popular for surf rock rather than jazz. And while we're on the topic of P90 similar pickups, we need to talk about the forefather of the P90, the Charlie Christian pickup. Basically, it's one of, if not the first, electromagnetic pickups with the one central magnet. It has a very unique, almost flat frequency response and almost no output, and was mainly popular in late 30s and 40s jazz, mainly used by the guy called Charlie Christian. Also, there are two options of this pickup existing now. One is a simple pickup and the other one is this, the original design. And those screws are basically connected to magnets, so they also interact in overall sound of the guitar. This is very unique thing, and I can recommend those pickups only for the people who looks for them specifically. And although those pickups are still can be found, I found only one company doing them at the moment. So yeah, it's more of the educational part rather than, oh look, a really interesting option on the market. The next pickup that fits into this topic is a Gretsch Dynasonic, and once again it's a shallow bobbin and a very difficult construction, which took me a few hours to figure out. So at this moment I will ask you to leave a like and subscribe because it was hell of a research. So this construction allows you to regulate pole pieces, which was innovation at the time. Magnet is mounted sideways, and in terms of sound, this is the mix between single coil and P90, so it's a good middle ground with warmness and brightness, and also the great note separation. I need to note that the later design of these pickups was changed. It changed 2 times, and now they're closer to P90 in terms of their overall design. And Gretsch is not over with surprising us with interesting takes on the single coil design. The next one is the Gretsch Hilotrons or Hilotrons. That looks like they are humbucker, but instead of 2 bobbins, they have only one and the horseshoe magnet. It's a very low resistance pickup with a very powerful magnet. A niche thing. I can understand this thing being used in jazz and somewhere around there, but I also found one picture where underneath the cover it ended up being a full-blown humbucker. So I don't know a thing about it. People who use Gretsch, please enlighten me in the comments. But the original Hilotron idea was a powerful magnet with 1 coil and a horseshoe design. And going back to Fender, fighting the hum, Fender created the lace sensors. It's a rather strange construction with very small coils and small and weak magnets on the side of the pickup and below it. Below we even have some kind of a like vinyl magnet, which is very weak. But the idea behind this pickup was to create two very small magnetic fields which will pick up far less interference because of how close the field will be to the pickups. This resulted in a lay sensor being not as loud and bright as a single coil, and basically was later replaced by the noiseless single coil. Fender stopped the production of the lay sensors in 1986, but now you can find them made by the company Lace Music Products. But before we go into noiseless single by Fender, I need to explain you what humbucker is. So fighting the hum on the single coils, Gibson engineers grabbed basically two P90s and ran them the opposite way to one another, which gave a rather amazing result. The hum basically disappeared and the humbucker was born. Yes, it's two coils working together, which results in a noise cancellation. Basically like on a noise cancelling headphones. You can achieve similar things when you use your pickup switch on any guitar with two singles while they are working together. But we'll speak more about humbuckers later. Now let's go back to the noiseless single coil. Fender wasn't fond of the humbucking overall, although they have a few models with humbuckers. They decided to create the noiseless single coil, which should sound like a single but have no noise. So what they did basically what Gibson did with their humbucker. They grabbed two coils, but instead of placing them next to each other, they placed one on top of each other. Yes, it's as simple as two singles stacked one on top of another. It removes hum, but also it removes part of brightness, clarity, and dynamics. And if we are talking the language of facts, this thing is a humbucker because it has two separate coils. So now let's return to the true noiseless single coils. Yes, those things do exist. And the best example of it is the Z-coil. If you ever seen Fender precision bass, yes, it's that thing. It's a true single coil, but the bobbin is split in two separate parts, which creates an artificial humbucker. But it sounds like a single coil and has no hum. It's one of the last Leo Fender inventions in G&L company. In terms of sound, this thing has a bit more frequencies than the standard single. So basically you can consider this thing being a single coil 2.0 or single coil premium. My biggest question is why no one uses this format on their guitars. Maybe it's a patent, but I don't really believe in this because we have the similar design on precision bass pickup. Or maybe people just don't like how Z-coil looks, and personally, yeah, I also don't like it either. But the benefits this thing gives, in my personal view, outweighs the drawbacks of the looks. Another cool take on a noiseless single coil is the Zex Coil. If you look below it, you can find that each pole piece have its separate coil, because in the end you need an even amount of coils to get a hum cancelling effect. And as a result, this pickup also doesn't have any hum, but it still sounds more like a single coil. Also, it's a bit brighter and has a bit more output. But overall, Zex Coil is the other take that gives you a single coil sound with no hum, And comparing to the Z-coil, you don't need to rework your pickguard or routing, and it doesn't even look different. So once again, I don't get why this type of pickup is not popular. Congratulations people, we covered all of the single coils. So if you are still with me and enjoying this video, hit a like, hit a subscribe button, there is more to come, and we are going straight for humbuckers. And now we are reaching humbucking territory. I've already mentioned that humbucker is a two single coils working in series, which removes the hum, makes the sound warmer, gives you far more low end and less high frequencies. But you are playing with the pickup dynamics. Humbucker tend to be far less dynamic and more compressed. But its darker tone made it very popular in, once again, jazz. And humbucking capabilities paved its way to all kinds of heavy music. Not saying you can't play rock on single coils, but the heavier you go, the more troubles you invite, especially if you're trying to play some kind of metal. The next cool feature of the humbucker is that it's still two coils, and with a bit of wiring magic you can make them work in two new ways. First is to split them, so only one coil is working, and you get a single coil. But now we need to be honest here, because coils in a humbucker are shorter and the amount of wire used isn't the same as in a true single coil, and we also have a backplate that is made of copper, and it also affects how magnetic field is distributed. It will never sound as true single. They'll give you from 80 to 95% similar sound. The second thing is that you can put the humbucker in parallel, which will decrease the output and make a sound a bit more bright while maintaining the humbucking effect. Some call this sound similar to single, but judge for yourself. In the end, humbucker definitely can sound similar to single coil, but if you want a true single coil sound, get yourself a real single coil. And this all because of the construction of the humbucker, where you have two shortened single coil bobbins sitting on top of the magnet, working together. And while we still did not forget about the single coils, look at those things. Looks like a single, yeah? Well, in fact, it isn't. It's a hot rail. It was created by using a long pole piece, which, first of all, makes a more even magnetic field spread, but as the result of this, take far less space, and you can cram two of those in the size of the single coil bobbin and get a basically mini humbucker. Why is it created? Well, mostly for modding the guitars with space only for single coils, or simply to not mess up your pickguard or routing inside the guitar body. Absolutely same thing can be said about single spaced humbucker. The only difference here is that these types of pickups do have a separate classic pole piece configuration, which should affect the sound and make it a bit closer to the classic humbucker sound. Now let's talk about different takes on a humbucker construction. For example, Fender created a wide range humbucker with a very interesting approach in mind. They decided to make them sound a bit more like Fender, so they decided to once again use the magnetic pole pieces. But the problem with this is that you cannot machine a normal magnet. So they decided to use a copper nickel iron magnet. So we have two rows of magnetic studs, like a complete and pure idea of two single coils stuck together. But this resulted in more wire and unique dimensions. In terms of sound, they are brighter and gnarlier compared to the Gibson PIF style pickup, and currently only done by Fender. Could be found in some of the models that can be defined by slightly different dimensions, and 3 open screws of pole pieces on opposite sides of each row. Most of the time it's a Telecaster Deluxes. Another take on a humbucker was done by Gretsch, the Filtertrone. First of all, compared to the Gibson PIF, it's a bit smaller, with pretty much the same construction, the only difference being that Gibson used 1 set of screws and 1 set of slugs, while here we have 2 sets of screws. The only differences in construction is that Gretsch pickup is held together by those screws, so they are not adjustable pole pieces, and you cannot adjust them if you want. Basically, there are no other differences in construction, but overall, Gretsch's, most of the time, are not created for high gain applications, yet, in terms of sound, they once again going a bit closer to the single coil sound with more dynamics, more brightness compared to PIF pickup. Interesting fact about Filtertones was that the original humbucker is the Filtertone, but Gibson was faster to patent and popularize their design. And also, another interesting fact about the Filtertone, that original Filtertones was not covered in wax, which kinda make them a bit noisy and microphonic. If you don't know what microphonic pickup is, well, basically it also picks up the sound around him. So if you scream into microphonic pickup, you will hear your voice through the amp. Also, thing to note that in some modern Gretches you can find both Filtertone and Gibson style humbucking design, and they are not interchangeable with one another because of different dimensions. And personally, I don't believe that other Gretsch pickups like Fulltrons and Broadtrons deserve a separate mention because, well, they're basically the same pickup as a Filtertone but with a bit different dimensions and specs in terms of sound, but overall idea behind them remains pretty much the same. And now let's go to the next one. It's a mini humbucker originally designed by Epiphone, then Gibson bought Epiphone and start to use a huge stock of mini humbuckers in their own products. I could say it's a humbucker but with a bit smaller dimensions, but it's just a bit more complicating. First of all, you get a one big monorail instead of 6 slugs on the one side. And also there is a second version of a mini humbucker. It's a Firebird mini humbucker, which have no slugs or screw studs. Instead, you have 2 rails. The more rails you introduce to the sound, the closer it will be to the single coil in brightness and dynamics, but still will have the humbucking properties. Overall, mini humbucker is basically a bit brighter and dynamic version of the bass humbucker. Next take on a humbucker is lace Alumitones. Well, it's a humbucker in every possible way, but with a one huge difference. The body is the coil, and it's a single wound around the magnet, instead of 1,000 wounds, which you can get on any other type of pickup. So there is almost no inductance, and as a result, no output. So Lace needed to fix this thing, and they decided to put the transformer on the lower part of the pickup. And this fixed the issue, and this pickup has the same output as any other humbucker on the market. But use of the single wrap of the coil and transformer changed the sound properties, which are more brighter and a bit more clearer. Those pickups paved its way in almost every genre of music. They are commonly used in fusion and jazz, but also can be used in metal. For metal, we have a bit different option called a Deathbucker with higher output. So let's toss the last variants of the pickup into the mix, the active ones. Active pickups were created for, first of all, metal players. When metal was only becoming mainstream, it was very hard to create a good overdriven sound. So you need to have any possible way to increase the output. There were two common ways. First is to move the pickups as close to the strings as possible, or you can put the more powerful magnet inside the pickup itself. If you do both, it can result in magnet catching the strings on itself while you're picking just a bit too hard. And believe me, it sounds terrible. Active pickups solve this problem in a rather interesting way. Inside the first active pickup, the EMG58, and all following, we have a very low powered magnet that will not pull down on the strings by itself, but basically makes pickup very quiet and extremely low output. To fix this, you have an active preamp that boosts the hell out of the pickup signal and amplifies it by several times. Such amplification requires an external power source, which provided by a 9-volt battery. That's why those pickups are called active. You can find active single coils, but they are rather rare. In terms of sound, it's a high output, clear but very compressed sound. Almost all EMG sounds like this, and made this way except by HC series, which are passive. The other interesting part about EMG pickups is that they use rail magnet, and also if you look at the bobbin, you will see they are smaller than on humbucker. So in the end, most of EMGs are not active humbuckers, they are active Firebird pickups, which explains their chimey sound full of high frequencies. Other honorable mentions of active pickup category is Seymour Duncan Blackouts and Fishman Fluence. And while we're still on the topic of active pickups, Fishman Fluence definitely deserve an extra spot on this list, because they are far from the classic pickup design. First of all, Fishman have a double coil design even on their single coils. So yes, this is a noiseless single coil. Second, Fishman's coils are not wound, they are printed out on a PCB, which creates a situation where all the pickups will sound exactly the same. Third, it has a full circuit board below it, which allows this pickup to basically be tuned however the Fishman company decides. That allowed to create a special voicing inside the pickups that can imitate both active and passive sounds. So it's hard to describe how Fishman sounds. but they have two downsides. First is battery life. EMG can live for half a year easily with very active use, and if you use them less often, for example like me, my battery lives for more than 2 years. But with the same use cases for Fishmans, they will die few times sooner. So if you can play a year on EMGs, you will only be able to play around half a year on Fishmans. And second downsides of the Fishman Fluence is that they have the biggest amount of factory issues I ever heard about. So yeah, I suggest only buying them new. And you know, the popularity of Fishman Fluence brings us to one very interesting phenomenon. When the first pickups were introduced, they were hand-wound. So the machine spun the bobbin, but the wire was distributed by a living human being. Later, this process can be done by a machine fully. And this could remove any sound difference because the coil will be distributed evenly on every pickup. And you know what? Guitarists hated this thing. They said that pickup made by a machine doesn't have the correct sound. And because of this, most of the big companies still uses the hand-wound technique. So two pickups of the same model will sound similar to one another, but never the same. And now Fishman introduced the pickup with a standardized production and no differences in sound. And guitarists are happy about it. So tell me about double standards. And the last notable thing about the pickup types is Sustainiac pickup. You can see it can be as a single coil or a humbucker. In the end, it's all just a single coil because only one of those are working. A second is basically a reverse pickup. So you install the battery and this thing transfers the electric energy to the kinetic energy. So what this thing can do, with the flip of a switch, you can feed back into the string the note you've played or the harmonic of that note. So this basically can give you up to infinite sustain or infinite harmonics. Useful in certain situations, interesting design, very interesting idea, and now you know how it works. Mostly popular in some kind of genres of rock and metal, and three most notable users are George Satriani, Sinister Gates, and Matthew Bellamy. And we covered almost every interesting pickup type, and now to a bit of the bonus round. So let's look into the category of some really strange, weird, and simply interesting pickups. The first is Schecter Tripocalypse. It's a triple coil that no one asked for and that didn't catch on a few years back. To be honest, I don't get the point of this thing because it's basically a basic humbucker but a bit worse. The setting on 3 coils at the same time will give you frequency and gain overload. Your amp will clip and your sound will have too much of frequencies. It will be very loud compared to any other settings, so basically you need to dial in a specific setting for this exact position. And yes, you need to have even amount of coils to have a humbucking effect. This thing is worse humbucker than a 2-coil original simpler design. But yeah, maybe in some years some musician will use this type of pickup to write some iconic album and those guitars will skyrocket in terms of price. But maybe they will not. Right now, it's a complete gimmick. I guess someone already thought about it while I was talking about the hot rails, to grab 2 of those and create a pickup with 4 coils in the space of a classic humbucker. So in comes the Quadbucker. Well, it's not very popular thing, mostly can be found on some Chinese websites made in the Chinese sweatshops, and you can purchase those from AliExpress, Wish or Temu. Once again, it's an overkill that most of the time distorts the sound on its own, which is maybe could be useful back in the day in the 80s, but right now you can definitely have a good high gain sound on a low output pickup. Right now, those kind of a Chinese pickups are mostly useful for memes. Hell, if we get 1,000 subs on this channel, I'm ordering one and putting this inside one of my guitars. But there is one interesting take on this. It's a bare knuckle impulse. This thing looks like a Quadbucker, but has a far less output and mostly used in modern metal with a distinct modern metal, very bright, clear and punchy sound. There are a lot, and I mean a lot, of different pickups that didn't make in this video. There are lots of unique designs, mostly made in early years of Japan guitar manufacturing and in USSR, but most of the time they are just different take on a single coil, and they are not manufactured right now, and most of the time they weren't that good, especially the Soviet ones. Soviet ones are complete disaster. So for the reasons of those pickups are no longer manufactured, they are no teardowns of it, so I can find the overall design idea behind them. There is no tone demos, etc. And nobody really written something noticeable on those guitars. I just won't mention those pickups. I acknowledge their existence, but I don't want to make this video infinite in length. And you know, here is a little bonus about magnets. So most of the time you will find two types of magnets inside the modern pickup. It will be either ceramic or Alnico. Alnico has 5 different types, ranges from 2 to 5, and the lower the number, the lower the output, where 2 and 3 is a lower output ones, 4 is a mid output, and 5 and 6 is high output. Ceramic is a strong magnet, which most of the time used in hot metal pickups. Are there other types of magnets in the pickup? Well, I already mentioned that a wide range humbucker from Fender has a different alloy inside the magnet, but I also managed to find one guy making a handmade guitar with neodymium magnets. And if you don't know, neodymium magnets are hella strong. And you know what? You have a distortion sound no matter on which amp you will play and no matter how clean and low gain the channel is. Is it useful? Well, maybe in a travel guitar if you don't have a digital amp. Yeah, it can be useful. Otherwise, no use cases. And now let's jump to conclusions about this video. Well, what pickup do I recommend? It heavily depends on what you are playing. And if you are an experienced player, good luck, you know what you need. Hope I entertained you enough to watch until this moment of the video. For beginners, it depends on what music you want to play. If you want a single coil sound, but you also have a wish to sometimes venture out into the realm of the high gain music, the HSS combo, which is humbucker single single, is what you need. Great versatility, you can get a good classic single coil sounds while also maintaining a humbucking sound in the bridge. On the other hand, the most versatile in terms of sound will always be 2 humbucker with mid output and the coil split. You can get at least 6 different sounds that can be used for anything from jazz to blues to rock and to metal. Modern amplification kinda do all the heavy lifting that previously was on the pickup. Modern high gain tone gives you a lot of headroom in terms of gain, and the only difference between high and low output pickup will be that the gain move from 3 to 6, and you will still have this headroom no matter what. If you are still not sure, I recommend you to look at your favorite guitarists that play your favorite music and mimic their pickup setup. It doesn't need to be their signature models, their signature pickups. You can start with the simply same configuration. But most of the time, I would recommend humbucker or humbucker single combo. And at this moment, I need to thank you very much for watching. It was a very big video. It took me a lot of time to gather, filter out, and double check all the info. And I'm pretty sure I still made some mistakes, especially in some vintage stuff, especially Gretsch pickups. And if you have those corrections, feel free to write them down in the comments. If it's only one, you get your comment pinned. If it's more, I'll probably create a one-pin comment myself. So if you're watching this video not on the first day, check down the pinned comment. It will have more information in there. But still, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for liking or even disliking and leaving your comments. I really hope this series of video will be entertaining and useful for you. And at this moment, once again, thank you very much for sticking until the end. Play good guitars, and bye.